Welcome to the Core Apex Skills module of the Apex Academy. In this module, we'll start to give you the formal training for the fundamental Apex techniques you're going to be using every day. It's time to get serious about code. My name is David Liu, and I'll be your loyal mentor throughout this course. Let's begin. Here's an overview of what we'll be talking about in this module. We'll start your training on the first tool, variables. Why we use them, how to use them, and what each variable data type represents. Then we'll discover the mystic, unspoken rules around variable naming. Ooh. We're gonna do a fairly in-depth demo that's going to home in your variable knowledge. Then we'll discuss a special type of variable called collections. We'll talk about the list and set collections and when to use each one respectively. Finally, we end with a collections quiz. We begin this adventure with variables. And you can't talk about variables without also talking about data types. So we'll cover that too. What is a variable? It's basically a place to store information in code. There are many reasons why we use variables, and I'm going to narrow them down to two main use cases. First of all, variables make our code easier to read because it simplifies code literally into English. Instead of having 50 characters of code typed out, a variable might simplify it to just say my account, for example. Another good reason why we use variables? We're lazy. Remember those times when writing complex formula fields in Salesforce where you've had to copy and paste blocks of your formula a bunch of times? If only you could use variables then. Variables let us store and reuse bigger blocks of code into one simple, easy to read word. And if you ever needed to change something around, all you need to do is update your variable once. No need to repeatedly find and replace a bunch of logic. Lazy people love variables. In fact, the lazier you are, the better a programmer you might be. This is one of the few professions on this planet that actually rewards you for being lazy. So be lazy and use variables. It might land you a job at Microsoft. There are 5 basic types of variables in Apex. A variable type, formerly known as a data type, simply describes what kind of information you'll be storing in your variable. Are you going to be storing text, or are you going to be storing dates, etc., etc.? You'll sometimes hear people say that Apex is a strongly typed language. This is just a fancy way of saying that every variable must be of a specific data type. The 5 general types of variables are listed here. Each of them on their own are pretty simple to understand, but each also has intricacies, special characteristics, and personalities that I'll teach you to master. One more thing. These data types are also sometimes called primitives because they're the most basic data types available. Don't worry, these make up the bulk of data types that you'll be using frequently. We'll cover the common non-primitive data types in this chapter too, aka collections. This is how you create a variable in Apex. The first thing you do is choose the data type of the variable. Remember, this decides what kind of information can be stored in your variable. The data type is so important because it dictates what you can do with your variable and where you can use it. This is very similar to choosing a field type in Salesforce when making a new custom field. After choosing a data type, you then choose your variable name. As long as your variable name has no spaces in it, you can pretty much choose it to be anything you want. That doesn't mean you should go all willy-nilly on a name though. Coders follow certain unwritten rules when it comes to naming these bad boys. We'll talk more about that later. After choosing a variable name, you have an equal sign, and to the right of the equal sign, you have the code you're setting your variable to. You can set your variable to any code statement you want, as long as the output of that statement matches the data type of your variable. So for example, if your variable data type is integer, you better have code after the equal sign that is an integer or computes to be an integer. No strings, no decimals, etc. If not, you're going to get an error when you try to save your code. Now let's take a more detailed look at each primitive data type.